second subject, this topic, I want to come back to some point that I mentioned yesterday. First of all, because it was too quick, and also because Pierre, to make the link with Pierre's lectures, and it was this question of embedding with Poisson kernel. Let me just come back on 2 or 3 transparencies, just to make sure that things are not too quick. So I recall that we were working with the real hyperbolic space, which is space Hn, which is a ball with some specific metric, and the boundary is a sphere. And there is a so-called Poisson kernel, which is a positive function which allows to reconstitute harmonic function inside with a given value on the boundary. Boundary being at infinity, but it has a meaning to say that the value of the function at infinity is some given functions. So this is a function which I denoted by p of x and theta, and I recall that with my notations x is inside and theta is on the boundary. And if one considers this as a measure px theta d theta, then it's a probability measure, and it's harmonic with respect to the first variable, which is the main property of the Poisson kernel. It allows to reconstruct harmonic function. But in the hyperbolic space, and in the hyperbolic space, as well as in other symmetric spaces, say rank 1, like the other hyperbolic spaces. So in the real hyperbolic space, we have a very nice relationship between Poisson kernel and the Boozman function, which is the one that I gave yesterday. It's written on the transparency. And you recognize this quantity exponential of minus n-1 Boozman, which is the one which appeared in the so-called how did I call it? Visual measure. So one should not be too naive and think that it is always the case for negatively curved manifold. If the curvature is variable, this is not true anymore. And we are with several kinds of measures. One is visual, one is given by a Poisson kernel, which is called harmonic, and another one is given by Boozman function, which I mentioned in the second part. So the other relation, which is really related to what Pierre explained this morning, is the fact that the square root of a Poisson kernel is an eigenfunction. So what do I mean by that? Anytime you fix a theta, which is a point fixed at infinity, you look at square root of Poisson kernel as a function of the variable inside, then it is an eigenfunction. So it's easy to compute because you have to compute, say, a Laplacian of the Boozman function, and we have plenty of explicit formula. But it's more than an eigenfunction. We know the eigenvalues, and it's n-1 square over 4. So it's what I call the bottom of the spectrum. So Pierre explained the compact case where the spectrum contains only eigenvalues. In the non-compact space, the spectrum is a set, well, these operators are self-adjoint, so the spectrum is a subset of the real line. And in fact, in the real hyperbolic space, it's just a half line which starts at n-1 square over 4 and goes to plus infinity. So the points in the spectrum are not eigenvalues, but they are points where Laplacian, so the spectrum is defined as usual, point where Laplacian minus identity is not invertible. So being not invertible means that either it has a kernel, which means that there are eigenfunctions, or it's not onto, it's not surjective, which correspond to other kind of point in the spectrum. But we could think of this as being an eigenvalue, which is a bit exaggerating, but why not? And square root of p gives eigenfunctions. Of course, these eigenfunctions are not L2 with respect to the variable x. And there are as many eigenfunctions as points on the boundary. So the space of eigenfunctions for the bottom of the spectrum is parameterized by the sphere at infinity. Again, it's a very nice situation. And again, then let me insist on the fact that contrary to what the case that Pierre has considered this morning, these eigenfunctions are not L2 eigenfunctions. But they deserve the name eigenfunction because of this relation here. So the thing we can do here is exactly a non-compact analog of what Pierre explained this morning. So he took the example of the sphere, where if you take some eigenspace, for example, the first eigenspace, you can embed the sphere in some, well, embed the sphere or the projective space, depending on the degree of the polynomials considered. You can embed the sphere in Euclidean space of various dimensions just by taking a basis of the eigenspace. Well, here is what we are going to do, but instead of having finitely many eigenfunctions, which allows to embed in a finite dimensional space, we have infinitely many. In fact, as I said before, this family of eigenfunctions is parameterized by the sphere on the boundary, the sphere of dimension n-1. So we may consider this map here, which, because P is a probability measure, arrives in the unit sphere of L2 of the boundary, and unit sphere being denoted by S infinity. And this map has two properties. One can check that it is an embedding, not difficult to do, and you can check exactly what Pierre explained this morning. If you pull back by this map psi 0 the canonical metric of L2, which you can always do, the map is reasonably smooth, then you get a multiple of the hyperbolic metric. And the coefficient which is involved here is this number, lambda 1, that is n-1 square over 4, divided by the dimension n. So it's a very nice situation where the embedding is, well, of course, it's not isometric, but it's almost, well, it's isometric up to this constant. So for these symmetric spaces of rank 1, I think it's, I'm not sure, well, rank 1, actually I don't know the situation in higher rank case, but for these symmetric spaces, the square root of Poisson-Kernel gives this very nice embedding, so you can view your symmetric spaces into this Euclidean space, this infinite dimensional Euclidean space, which is L2. It's very similar to what Pierre explained. The only point is that the Crofton formula or anything like this in infinite dimension is not clear to me how to do, but it would be worth to try to do something. So I want to insist on this infinite dimensional geometry, which is not well known, and I'm pretty sure that there is a lot to do, again, with this kind of stuff. So then the thing that I said yesterday is not only that, so this map is nice in the sense that I mentioned over there, but I mean, the image as a submanifold of L2 or S infinity is a very nice manifold, submanifold. In fact, it's minimal. It's a minimal submanifold. Actually, I never tried to compute the mean curvature and check that it is 0, but we used yesterday, I explained a different method, because it's not only minimal, but it's also minimizing. It's absolute minimum, which is amazing. And as I said, the only method I know to prove that a submanifold is minimizing really is a calibration theory. And this is a calibration theory occurs only in very specific situations, group actions and this kind of thing. But let me continue with this transparency and the next one, and then I'll switch to the other purpose. So if you take a co-compact, a discrete co-compact subgroup of the isometric group of the hyperbolic space, so that the quotient is a compact manifold, which is locally hyperbolic. So any element of this group acts on the sphere at infinity by conformal transformation. I started the lecture yesterday by this fact, and hence you can have it acting on L2. It's a classical fact that if it acts on a manifold, it acts on L2. Just you have to multiply by here the square root of the Jacobian, well-chosen Jacobian, so that if you make the change of variable, you can check that the gamma dot f as a L2 norm, which is equal to the L2 norm of f, that is, the action on L2 is isometric. So although the action on the sphere at infinity Sn minus 1 is not isometric, it's conformal, the action on the L2 is isometric. Well, in fact, this Jacobian of the action at infinity, on the sphere at infinity, this Jacobian over there, which is a Jacobian on Sn minus 1, is closely related to the Poisson kernel. I don't want to write down the formula, because there are already too many formulas, but it's closely related to the, well, in fact, it's a Poisson kernel taken at some point, so I'm not sure I remember the details, but well, the point is now that this map psi 0 is equivariant with respect to these two actions. So one is the isometric action of this group gamma onto into the hyperbolic space, and the other one is the isometric action of this group gamma in L2, on L2. And this map is equivariant. In fact, it's more than that. I mean, you could take any gamma in the isometric group of Hn. So it's equivariant with respect to all isometries of the hyperbolic space, or all conformal transformation of the sphere, which is the same. And hence you can easily check, and this is a nice exercise to do, that in fact the image of psi 0 is the orbit of the isometric group of Hn, which I wrote PON1, that's what it is, the orbit of one point in L2 by the action of this group. So the point in L2 you could take is, for example, the constant function equal to 1. So if we assume that the measure d theta is normalized, then this constant function equal to 1 is in S infinity. And you look at the orbit of this function under this action, the orbit by the full group of isometries of Hn, and you get a submanifold which is the image of psi 0. So it's when you have in the situation that a submanifold is the orbit of a group, then there is a good hope that you can show something. And it's true also for other symmetric spaces. And so, okay, so the Bess's nice embedding that I mentioned last time, no, I did not mention anything actually. You just saw this and I skipped the explanation. Well, it's exactly what Pierre explained this morning. Embedding a manifold by taking a specific manifold into a Euclidean space by taking a bunch of eigenfunctions for the same eigenvalues. So, for example, for the sphere, canonical sphere, Pierre described this morning several kinds of such embeddings. So it's called Bess's nice embedding. So in Bess's book, which is manifolds all of whose geodesic are closed, this was used to study a conjecture which has been proved since, and now this kind of embedding are called this way. So, but this was in Bess's book, this was for compact manifold, and in the situation that Pierre explained this morning. Here we have a non-compact version of that, and I'm pretty sure that this should give, well, more than what I will say in a minute. So this is an infinite dimensional geometry, which is really interesting. So, and then I explained that psi 0 is minimizing. I have to define what I mean by minimizing. The image is non-compact, of course, because it's the image of all Hn. So that's why I took a co-compact subgroup of the isometric group, so that you can restrict to a fundamental domain, for example, and look at all possible maps from Hn to this unit sphere in this Hilbert space, which are gamma equivalent with respect to this gamma. So there are plenty, you can construct by hands maps which are functions of the distance in Hn. So it's very easy to construct. All possible such map, and if you take a fundamental domain for the action of gamma in Hn, then the theorem is that the image of psi 0 is minimal and even minimizing. That is, more precisely, you look at this psi of d of the fundamental domain in L2 or S infinity. These are like n-dimensional submanifolds. They are not really submanifolds, but there is a way to compute the volume of these objects. Let's assume that they are submanifold. You can compute the volume of these objects, and really the minimal value for the volume is when you take this map psi 0. So you may ask, is the image of psi 0 totally geodesic? The answer is no. It's not totally geodesic, but it's minimal and absolutely minimizing. So it's a very interesting situation. So this is done, well, in dimension 3 it's sharp. Greater or equal to 3 is sharp. It's not true in dimension 2, well, always because of this Teichmüller space. And the proof is done by calibration. So let me just recall the form which calibrates. So this story about calibration is a very, I mean, if you have a submanifold and you suspect that it is minimizing, and you want to construct by hand the calibration, it never works. You have to have this calibration coming from some structure, like a group action or something like this. Here we do have it. And that's what is nice with this situation. Yeah, how does it work? So it goes again through this barycentric map. So I explained that if you take a function which is in a unit sphere in L2, well, you raise the function to, you square this function, and you can make it into a probability measure on the sphere. It's an obvious thing to do. And then you take a barycenter. Then you get a projection of the sphere. Well, you could take also, you don't need to take a function whose norm is equal to 2, but to 1, I'm sorry. Whose L2 norm is equal to 1, but it's simpler. Then you get a projection from this S infinity to onto Hn. And if you pull back by this projection the volume form of the hyperbolic space, then one gets the N form in S infinity or even in L2, which is closed. And this form calibrates the image of psi 0. So this is so this proposition I don't prove, it is exactly, so if you remember what I said yesterday, for n greater or equal to 3, the calibration inequality, which says that it calibrates, is exactly the inequality which was satisfied by this functional capital F that I mentioned yesterday. Okay, so it's a nice interpretation of what I explained. If you take this visual measure, then you can construct this extension, as I did yesterday. And this extension has nice properties with respect to the volume, the contract volume. But the interpretation is that, in fact, you construct a submanifold. So this Boozman function and the density in the visual measure is a Poisson kernel. And in fact, you construct this submanifold, which is absolutely minimizing in L2 among all maps as I described. I think it's a situation which is very exciting. So I don't come back on the calibration theory, which I guess you probably know better than me here. So just one point, for n equal to 2, so this inequality that I proved yesterday, that I didn't prove actually yesterday. Let me recall this function of f. So if I remember well the constants, it was n minus 1 to the n divided by n over 2, and then square root of determinant of h divided by determinant of identity minus h. So I stated a lemma which is not difficult to prove, and which is what I call here calibration inequality. So f is a functional on the space of positive definite symmetric matrices so these are the H with, furthermore, the fact that the trace of H is equal to 1. A positive, since we are working with determinants, positive definite symmetric matrices just mean that you take the eigenvalues with a bunch of numbers, n numbers which are positive and whose sum is equal to 1. And we showed, well, no, I didn't show anything actually. I said, and that's easy to check, that this inequality was true and sharp for n greater or equal to 3. It's not true. Unfortunately, it's not true in dimension 2. The inequality is not true. And it's good. And in fact, I think, it's a long time I've not done this computation, I think it goes the other way around in dimension 2, strangely enough. But the calibration story is true. If n is equal to 2, the submanifold given by the Poisson kernel is indeed calibrated, but not by this form here, by another one. Well, in fact, how can I say that? Oh, okay, let me say it without giving too many details. But if you take a measure of this form, and if you are lucky, you can write it as the push forward of this measure by a homeomorphism of the circle. So we are now in dimension n equal to 2, which means that the sphere at infinity is a circle. Or I should say diffeomorphism, because I'm taking derivative. So don't ask me about degree of differentiability, about topology, and so on. It's not very clear, just a heuristic interpretation. And you see that what fixes this measure here is are just the rotation, the homeomorphism, the diffeomorphism, which fixes d theta. In dimension 1, it's a measure and a metric at the same time, so they are just rotation. So that this S infinity could be identified, and this is not so clear, to the action of the diffeomorphic group of S1 divided by S1. S1, this S1 here being the rotation. Okay, so in fact, our Poisson, square root of Poisson kernel gives an embedding in the two-dimensional hyperbolic space into this space here. Well, it turns out that this space has a lot of structure, and I don't know if you are familiar with representation theory. I was not. I'm still not very familiar. But if you look at the diffeomorphism group of S1, and if you think of it as being let's say it's a Lie group, then this is one of the co-adjoint orbit of this group. If you look at this co-adjoint of orbits, and hence by the classical theory, there is a symplectic structure on this space. In fact, there is much more than a symplectic structure. There is a Keller structure. So there is a complex structure and a Keller structure. And it turns out that the image by the square root of Poisson kernel is a complex submanifold, so that it's calibrated by the Keller form. And so the Keller form is very interesting to write down, and I didn't bring my notes, but it's related, the calibration inequality is related to the isoperimetric inequality. But it's a different point of view. So in dimension 2, we use the complex structure, which is the natural structure on the two-dimensional hyperbolic space. In dimension greater or equal to 2, we don't have this complex structure, but on the other hand, we have this barycenter construction here. So this square root of Poisson kernel is always calibrated. In dimension greater or equal to 2, it's equivalent to what I said yesterday with this extension. In dimension 2, it's related to the complex structure and the fact that these objects, so this is these are works by Kirillov and his students, and I mean, if you want to write down everything with the topologies, then I think it doesn't work, in fact. But still, I mean, at the heuristic level, you can check that there is a Keller structure in this space here, thin-dimensional space. So I just want, I mean, you can forget about the big names that I've used, like Keller structure and this kind of thing. I just wanted to emphasize the fact that this infinite-dimensional geometry is very interesting, and that this embedding that I mentioned in the previous transparency is a very nice non-compact counterpart of what Pierre explained this morning. Okay, so I think I have insisted enough. let's move to something else. Okay, that's for today. So I try to do this Beamer file because then I can hand out the file to those who are interested. But it's painful, it takes a lot of time, so tomorrow I'll use mainly the Blackboard, I promise. So today I want to in the first part of this lecture to go a little bit further and to explain how one can relax. So we had yesterday two hyperbolic space. I want to relax the assumption on the source space, on the domain space, forgetting the hyperbolicity. And then I want to start moving towards the geometry of groups by looking today at some of the structure of the group of the hyperbolic manifold, compact hyperbolic manifold. It's not. I'm not being very clear, but it will become clear in a moment. Okay, so. I'm not. I don't think that the notation are really optimal. But so yesterday we had these two spaces, which I so one which is a domain spaces, the other one which is the target space. It's really ridiculous. I always draw the same pictures. And so both were copies of the hyperbolic space, real hyperbolic space. So now I want to keep this one to be the real hyperbolic space. And so I'll probably call it X. And this one will be some Hadamard manifold. So that is a simply connected manifold, which is negatively curved. Well, non-positively curved, but for me, negatively curved. You can even require the curvature to be pinched negatively. So the curvature is, for example, the sectional curvature is bounded above by -1. See, it doesn't go too close to 0. And I want to do exactly the same thing as yesterday, exactly the same thing. And you remember the tools? The tools were Boozman functions and Boozman functions. The first one were used for the visual measure, and the second one were used for this barycentric map. So Boozman function in this setup always exist, and they are again parameterized by point on the boundary. So there is no difficulty. The definition that I gave was very, how can I say, flexible, so that it can extend to this case and extend to a lot of cases that Hervé may consider in the future. So the only thing that I need, the barycenter is the same. Essentially what we used is the convexity of the Boozman function, which is a feature of negative curvature. So this we have here. And the barycenter was something that we used on the target space. So the target space is always the same than yesterday. So nothing has changed here. The only thing that I have to explain is how to replace the visual measure. So as soon as you allow the curvature not to be constant, variable, then all these objects which are more or less the same, visual measure, Poisson kernel, and what I'm going to describe here becomes immediately different. So one has to be careful with this. So what I will describe, which is a well-known object, which is called the Patterson-Sullivan measures. In fact, as yesterday, it's a family of measures. So I will describe the construction of these Patterson-Sullivan measures. And you see that after this description is finished, that obviously what I've done yesterday does work in this situation. Okay, so I will assume that this manifold here, and the other one also later, but for the moment, for the time being, let me assume that there is a discrete, that the isometric group of this manifold, which may be empty, contains a discrete subgroup, so that the quotient is compact, so a co-compact lattice, as I said last time. And I'll use this subgroup, more pictures are coming, to construct this family of measures, Patterson-Sullivan. So the original idea goes back to Patterson. So Samuel Patterson was working in dimension 2, and what was it trying to do? I think it was trying to work on harmonic functions on surfaces, not using the Poisson kernel actually. So again, I may use an origin. So the first step is to introduce this so-called Poincaré series of the group gamma. So it's a formula, it's a series which is given by the formula above. So what are we doing here? I'm taking a point y, which very soon will be the origin. I'm looking at the orbit of y. So these are points which are the orbit of y by the group gamma. And since the group is discrete, this orbit is discrete inside the space, and so it accumulates on the boundary only. It's discrete inside. And I'm taking another point x, and I'm looking at distance from x to the various points in the orbit. And looking at this formula here, exponential of minus s times this distance, and I take the sum over all elements of the group, discrete group gamma. So this is a family, this is a series, or these are series because it's parameterized by x and y, which are which come from the number theory. I mean, they are geometric counterpart of the Dirichlet series in number theory. And in fact, in some situation, studying the hyperbolic space is related to number theory. And I probably finish the lecture tomorrow by some example. Well, so if S is very big, although the distance goes to infinity, one can check that this series converges. And as when you let S go down, there is a critical value such that it converges for S greater than this critical value, and it diverges for S smaller than this critical value. And this critical value is called this critical exponent. No surprise, it's critical and it's an exponent. So, what else can you say about it? Delta of gamma. This is a very important number, and you'll see how it is related to what I did yesterday. Well, so apparently this critical exponent should depend on x and y. It's a very easy exercise, and you should try it. Well, the graduate student should try it. I'm not sure I can do it, actually. To check that it does not depend, just use the triangular inequality, and you can check that the critical value of this series does not depend on x and y. So you may well use choose an origin to do that. And also, this is a fact which is maybe not so easy to check, but which is true, that for the value s, the series diverges in this setup. So I insist on the fact that it is in this setup that the group gamma is co-compact, the quotient is compact. There are cases, if you take a group which is not co-compact, where the series does not diverge, converges, and that divides the groups, discrete groups, in two categories, convergent and divergent. But here we are in the divergent case. Okay, so this was, now let me come back on this. So this is the critical exponent. So I will give now another definition and say that it is the same thing. So why should I bother to give two definitions? Well, because later in the lecture, I will relax one assumption here, and I'll use this one definition. So just remember this one, definition of a critical exponent. And let's move to some other object, which is sometimes called the entropy, volume entropy. So it's called entropy because it is indeed related to some dynamical properties, although the definition is not dynamical at all. So for the manifold Y, we look at this very now standard thing, which I called H vol of Y. Oh, okay, I have something to change. It should be something like this. So transparency, H sub vol of Y. Okay, I have to correct that. Well, the definition is very simple. You look at ball of radius r around a given point, say y, small y, volume of this ball. So we are in negative curvature, and the volume of this ball grows exponentially. And the only thing you want to do is capture the exponential rate of growth. So take the logarithm, divide by r, and take a lim sup. And you get a number. Well, it turns out that in this situation, the lim sup could be taken as a lim. So there is a limit, and you get a number, which is this number here. And in a minute, it will be called H only, to make it simple. So which is what we call the volume entropy. So why is it called volume entropy? In the negative curvature context, this is related to the volume of the, to the topological entropy of the geodesic flow, if you know that. If not, doesn't matter. Okay, so this is a very easy definition. Some facts about it. Again, you can check that it does not depend on the point you started with. Well, if you have a ball of radius r around some point y, and you take another point x, this ball of radius r is included in a ball of radius r plus the distance of the ball between the 2 points. And you can check that this does not change the limit at all. So this is, again, a very easy thing to do. Well, that's all I already said. It's not always a limit if the quotient is not compact, but here it's an easy situation. And it turns out that this is the same than the preceding one. It's not too easy to do. Yeah, how can I say that? Let me write something. So the definition of the critical exponent is a definition that I can use. Maybe I should write in the middle of the blackboard. Is the infimum of these numbers S, which are positive, well, non-negative, such that this sum here, say, let me take the origin. So x to gamma times the origin converges. So this is the definition of the critical exponent. And in our situation, another definition of H could be the infimum. Is it too low? No? For the camera, is it okay if I write here? Okay. It's the infimum of number S, so that the integral of a whole manifold y of the exponential of minus s d, again taken any point, x, y, the volume element of the metric, Vg of y, is finite. So this is easy to check because this is the integral of a function which depends only on the distance. So you can write it in polar coordinates around the point x, and you can see that the volume of spheres or balls, depending on how you do it, enters in the story. So it's an easy exercise to check that this is equal to this. And now why are these two equal? Well, just comparing a sum to an integral, and we have a compact quotient, so the points go everywhere. Yes, as long as the quotient is compact, yes. Well, if you look at compact quotient, for example, in the real hyperbolic space, it's always equal to n minus 1 if you look at compact quotient. Am I correct here? Yes, I think so, yeah. But later, I gave this definition like this because later I will use discrete group such that the action is not co-compact. And then it really depends on the group gamma. So now, this is the next point that maybe, okay. So here is an example on which you can check. The real hyperbolic space, if you compute the second number, of course you know the growth of the volume of balls, it's easy, and you can check that it is n minus 1. And it is true that for any lattice which is co-compact on the real hyperbolic space, the critical exponent is also equal to n minus 1 because of co-compactness. If you relax this co-compactness assumption, that's not true anymore. I had a doubt. I was doubting a minute, but it's true, right? Yeah. But I want to keep the mention to gamma because later in the lecture I will use groups which are not co-compact and for which this dimension really varies from one group to the other. So now let me come to the point, which is the construction of this family of measures, which I call Patterson and Sullivan. So why is it called Patterson and Sullivan? So they appeared first in Patterson's paper, and then Sullivan extended to higher dimension and gave a geometric interpretation, which is what really we need here. So let's look at this expression here. So unfortunately, I realized that I've used delta for another meaning. So let's look at this. So I take this object, which is a measure, which is a combination of Dirac. So the delta, which is here, I'm sorry, has a different meaning. It's a Dirac measure, so supported on the orbit of the origin. So the orbit is a set of points on the infinite set of points which accumulates on the boundary, the orbit of O, and I put a Dirac measure at each of these points. And I take this sum. Of course, you cannot take the sum. They are without coefficient because there are infinitely many points, and it would not converge. So I take weights, which are this expression closely related, as you can see, to what appeared in the Poincaré series. And since I want this to be a probability measure, just divide by the quantity which is below, which is the Poincaré series P of y and 0. Okay, so this is a measure supported inside the space on the orbit of on one orbit of the group. You could choose any orbit actually, but on one orbit of the group. Now what happens when S goes to the critical value? So as I said, the group is, well, the Poincaré series diverges, so that the denominator here goes to infinity. So what does that mean? If you take any set here and you compute, so let's take any compact set here. In green is not a good idea, maybe yellow. I take a compact set. So since it is compact and the orbit is discrete, there are finitely many points which are involved. So finitely many Dirac mass which are involved. So the numerator is finite, even if S goes to the critical value. But on the other hand, the denominator goes to infinity, so that the measure of this set goes to 0. But on the other hand, if you compactify the manifold by the boundary, it's a compact set, so it should have at least subsequent should have limits. So if it has limits, certainly the limits will be measures which accumulate on the boundary, where most of the points are in some sense. And this is what happened. So again, in this situation, it's very nice, and there are cases for which, well, I don't like this picture. That's the best I could do yesterday. It was very late. Sorry. This is the same than that one, but... So the weak limits exist, and So the point is that you take a subsequence of S's going to the critical value such that it converges, weak limit exists for all y. One has to be careful with that, but it does work in that setup. And so you get a family of measures depending on the point y, which are supported on the boundary by this argument that I said, that the denominator goes to infinity. So the fact that the group has this property, that the Poincaré series is divergent, is very important here. Okay, so this pairs measures, so maybe you need, I don't know if you need to read this again. So this is a very classical construction. There is a book which is by Nichols, which is on this subject only, but studying all kind of groups, and this is a very useful tool. And you will understand in a minute why. So the properties, as I said, is that this family of measures, so for each y, they are supported on the boundary. And it is equivalent by the group action. That's by construction. And the main property for me is that if you take two of these measures, one at y, one at 0, for example, the origin, they are absolutely continuous with respect to each other. And the density is again some exponential of Boozman function, which a coefficient which is not now n-1, as was the case for yesterday, for the real hyperbolic case, but this delta of gamma or h, which I wrote here. But still, I mean, we are exactly in the same situation than yesterday. And the proof that I gave, you can go through the proof and check that there are only a few coefficients which are different. And can redo the same proof, and the extension will satisfy a contraction property, but it's not 1 anymore. Now it's this number. Just check that when you differentiate. Yesterday, there was an n-1 coming out. Now it's a h. So I mean, yesterday h was n-1, which would give 1 now. In this setup, where we have relaxed the assumption on this source space, then we get this contraction property. And this contraction property is sharp also. I didn't say it, but did I say it? No. It's also sharp than yesterday. I forgot to say it. That is, at some point there is equality. Then the differential of phi at this point, well, it's not an isometry, but it's an isometry composed with some homophacy. So it's an isometry as up to some multiplicative factor. So it's really, again, sharp, and I'm sorry, I should have written, so this should be written everywhere, that n is greater or equal to 3. Again, two-dimensional case is different. So this is a very slight variation on the theme of yesterday. I'll show, and so my goal is in the next alpha hour to show a different variation, and tomorrow to show another one. Okay, so the theorem that one can prove with it is some so-called minimal entropy. So let me assume that I can make a compact quotient of the hyperbolic space also, and that these two space y divided by gamma, which is negatively curved, and x divided by gamma 0, which is a compact hyperbolic space, that there is a map of degree 1 between these two spaces. Then one has the above inequality, the below inequality, that relates the volume of this manifold and these numbers, h and n-1. And this equality, this inequality is an equality if and only if the manifolds are isometric. Well, I should say, well, isometric is fine. Homothetic. And again, I have forgotten the main hypothesis that n is greater or equal to 3. So I have to correct that. In the case dimension 2, the inequality is true, but the equality case is not true. And the inequality is true with a different proof. Okay, so in fact, this theorem could be made more general. Y needs not be negatively curved, actually. But then it's more difficult to define the Patterson-Sullivan measures. And the map could be any map of degree, whatever number, which is not 0. But let's forget about this. It's not really interesting for today. Okay. So this was a slight variation on what I did yesterday. Now I want to do a more important variation, and tomorrow, hopefully, another one. So I want to talk about a structure of fundamental groups of hyperbolic manifolds. So let me start by an example, a very elementary example. So it's not such a beautiful picture, but it was maybe 10:30 or 11 yesterday night. And so this is a surface of genus 2 with a geodesic red geodesic in the middle. So the fundamental group of the circle Z as a generator of the circle, of the red circle, is Z, of course, with as a generator which I call C. And if you cut along the red circle, you get two tori with some hole. So I draw the tori differently as we are used to draw them in algebraic topology. And I mentioned the generators of these torides, A1, B1, and A2, B2. And of course, the orientation. So if you want to glue these two copies to recover the manifold upstairs, then you have to reverse the orientation on C to make an orientable manifold. And so what you see on this very basic picture in algebraic topology is that the image of this C here in the fundamental group of the left-hand side is the commutator of A1 and B1. And the image of C in the fundamental group of the right-hand side is the opposite of the commutator of A2 and B2. Commutator being 0 if we would have this disk filled in. Left-hand side is E1, B1, maybe it's B1, A1, but I think it's E1, B1. And the image of C, the fundamental group of the right-hand side is E2 and B2. Okay, so we are talking about surfaces with holes. So each side are surfaces with holes. So the fundamental group are just free groups in that case. So we have two free groups, the group which is a fundamental group of the left-hand side and the right-hand side, free group generated by A1 and B1, and free group generated by A2 and B2. And this C, this generator of the circle, maps in these two groups and correspond on the one side to the commutator and the other side to the opposite of the commutator. So the fundamental group of the full surface, and this is nothing but Van Kampen's theorem that I'm trying to describe here, is the free group on 4 generator, where you add the relation that this embedding of this C of the generator of the circle is the same, which is it. And you recognize, indeed, the fundamental group of this surface of genus 2. Okay, so this is an elementary version of what I call baby example of a situation I want to study. In that situation, we say that the fundamental group of the surface is the result of the amalgamation of two free groups, one A1, B1, and the other one A2, B2, and amalgamated over the group generated by C. And the notation is usually this one. F A1, B1 is a free group generated by A1, B1, the other one, and amalgamated is a star over Z. Okay. This is a baby example. So what I want to understand is so it's not such a deep question, but it's the opportunity to describe a different version of the method. So now I want to look to higher dimensional hyperbolic manifold, which are compact, such that the fundamental group is also amalgamated. I did not yet give a definition of this amalgamation, but you can keep in mind the previous example, and the definition is coming in the next transparency. But let me give an example, which is, I put examples, but there is only one. This I have to correct also. So let's assume that the compact manifold is splitted in two parts by a compact submanifold which separates, which I call Z. And these situations do occur. There are plenty of examples actually of this type. And Z I assume to be a totally geodesic submanifold which separates. So Z is also hyperbolic because it's totally geodesic. Then if I call A the fundamental group of the left-hand side, which is an open manifold, B the fundamental group of the right-hand side, which is also an open manifold, and C the fundamental group of Z, then the fundamental group of the big manifold by Van Kampen's theorem is amalgamated. So it's a free product of A and B amalgamated along C. So this is the same situation than the two-dimensional situation that I mentioned. This picture is much better. Okay. So let me maybe give a definition. So we have three groups: fundamental group of X1, fundamental group of X2, fundamental group of Z. So it's not difficult to see that fundamental group of Z injects in the two other groups. And the injection, I could, for example, call them J1, injection into A, J2, injection into B. Now the definition of amalgamation is just, you have these two groups A and B, you can make the free product, so it's a huge object, and you can mod out this free product by a family of relations. And the family of relations are just that if you take an element of the third group C, the image by J1 and the image by J2, they coincide. This is exactly what I did on the example. So there are plenty of examples of manifold which are amalgamated, and not only with a totally geodesic surface. There are cases where C is just a group which a priori has nothing to do with any hypersurface. And well, Alex Lubotsky gave lots of examples. And in fact, there are plenty of examples of hyperbolic manifold which have a finite cover which is of this type. This is related to some conjecture of Thurston in dimension 3, which is about virtually Eichen manifold, but let's forget about this. Well, to make it simpler, I will assume that did I wrote it correct? Well, what I want to say is A as a subgroup of gamma has infinite index, and B as a subgroup of the big group has infinite index, just to kill some trivial example. Of course, you could think of amalgamation which are completely trivial, like the one that I'm going to draw now. And I cut a small ball. And of course, on one side, I have the fundamental group of the ball, which is 0, and the other side, I have almost everything. So I want to kill this kind of stupid example. So I make this assumption. Voilà, okay, voilà. Now I come to the point. So okay, the theorem I want to describe is that if we do this if the fundamental group of well, let me stop here. If the fundamental group of an hyperbolic manifold, a compact hyperbolic manifold, is of this type, then the group on which you amalgamate is big. It cannot be small. It cannot be Z. It has to be very big. And I have to measure the size of this group by some quantity. So the quantity I want to use is the critical exponent. Okay. So now I will, so the formula that I gave before for the critical exponent apply. So here I use groups which are co-compact, but where did I use co-compactness? Nowhere. I just needed the group to be discrete. So now I can apply this definition to this group C, which is not co-compact, as a subgroup of the isometric group of Hn, and get a critical exponent for C, which now depends on the group a lot. even though we are in a hyperbolic situation. So here's the picture. So the crosses are just the orbit of the origin O by this group C, which is small with respect to the ambient space. And since the group is discrete, again, this orbit accumulates at infinity, and it accumulates on a subset at infinity, which is called the limit set. So the limit set is the red line. Here it's described as a line, which is drawn on the sphere at infinity. Well, it turns out that this object is almost never, for example, if the dimension of the hyperbolic space is 3, so that the dimension of the sphere is 2, and the group is small, this object is something like a curve. It's almost never rectifiable. So it's a very, well, it's not rectifiable curve. And the critical exponent is most of the time, in the good cases, related to the Hausdorff dimension of the circle at infinity. Okay, and here it does depend strongly on the structure of the group, on the group. So you can compute, you can talk about critical exponent with this same definition, and you can give the same definition for Patterson-Sullivan measures. And again, Patterson-Sullivan measures is supported by the part of the boundary where most of the points are, that is on the limit set. So you get a family of measures which are not supported on the whole boundary, but just on the red line here, on the limit set. But this is not really a problem. I didn't define the limit set, the set of accumulation points on the boundary at infinity. So you look at one orbit, it accumulates on a set on the boundary, and this is what I call lambda of C, which is the limit set of the group. Okay. Well, in the example where Z is totally geodesic, then it means that the group action preserves a totally geodesic subspace, which in the case of the hyperbolic space is a subdisk whose boundary is an equator. So the limit set is, in the case of the example where the manifold is split by a totally geodesic submanifold Z, then the limit set is just an equator. So in that case, it is rectifiable, of course. So one example where the structure is easy to describe. So we should always keep in mind this situation, but there are plenty of examples where this is not the case. And so the theorem I want to address is, so Yehuda Shalom produced this result, which says that if the fundamental group of hyperbolic manifold is amalgamated, the group on which you make the amalgamation has to be big in the sense that the critical exponent is greater or equal to n minus 2. So where does this n minus 2 comes from? Well, again, if we are in the good situation where the group preserves a totally geodesic submanifold, so the orbit is included in some totally geodesic hypersurface, then the limit set here is just the equator, and its dimension is n minus 2. The sphere is n minus 1. And the limit set here is an n minus 2 dimensional sphere. So in that case, the critical exponent is n minus 2. So this is the smallest possible value, and this is what this theorem proves. Well, it's really nice if you are interested in groups and in fundamental group of hyperbolic manifold. You may ask the question, when is a group the fundamental group of a hyperbolic manifold? So if it is amalgamated, and if you can somehow say something about the critical exponent of the amalgamation, you have some kind of a positive or negative answer. The point with this theorem is that the equality case was not treated. And so what we did is to modify the proof using our technique and to and we were able to get the equality case. So with the same hypothesis, you can prove the same inequality, but I didn't repeat it. It was not necessary. 2008, yes. The same inequality, but furthermore, I mean, with this technique of barycentric map, we can get the equality case. And the equality case occurs if and only if we are in this very specific situation, that is, the manifold, which I call X now. X is a quotient. I have switched my notation in the middle, so X is this space, which is compact. So the minimal value for this critical exponent occurs if and only if the manifold X, let me use this picture here, is separated in two parts by a totally geodesic hypersurface and connected. And furthermore, in that case, this group C, which makes the amalgamation, is the fundamental group of V. So this elementary situation, which exists, corresponds to the minimal value. So there are other cases where we don't have separating hypersurface. So what I should explain, but I think I won't have time to do it today, is a different proof of the inequality. And so the proof is different. It extends also to variable curvature, but that's not a big deal. And what I should explain is the construction that is used in the proof. So there are 4 steps. So I have a description of the different steps, and maybe I'll stop there, and tomorrow I'll give more details on each of them. Okay, let's do it this way. I've been slower than expected, which is good also. Okay, so the proof by Shalom is related to representation theory. And of course it works only for hyperbolic spaces. Our proof is related to these maps that I've constructed yesterday, and then it extends to variable curvature, as I showed at the beginning of this lecture. So let me describe the 4 steps. So step 1 says that, so we'll be mainly looking, well, not at the quotient manifold, but, so let me recall that here the fundamental group is amalgamated. This is the hypothesis, and this is what I call gamma. And I want to look at the space which is non-compact space, which is Hn divided by C. So it is some kind of cylinder. If you think to the case of surfaces where there is the geodesic, which separates, then this would be Hn divided by the fundamental group of the geodesic, which is Z. And of course, this would be exactly a cylinder like this with a geodesic in the middle. So the first step is to show that the picture is exactly this. That is, that in particular, there is a cycle in the middle, which I call Z, not this one, which is non-trivial in homology. So the one I mentioned here. But, I mean, you can forget about this homology stuff. Just think that there is a cycle in the middle. So we have a cylinder with a cycle which is non-trivial, essential, as Gromov would say. And it turns out that, well, there is a result by Gromov which says that any time that you have such a cycle on this manifold, which may be non-compact, then its volume cannot be close to zero. So the situation is exactly the one that I've drawn on the picture. So what are the other possibilities? The other possibility in dimension 2 would be a cusp, like this. And the cycle could be this one, for example. And you could take representative with arbitrary small volume. So what states this theorem which is a consequence of the theorem by Gromov, is that we are really in this situation, that is, the cycle cannot become arbitrarily small. So I'll explain where it comes from tomorrow. This is the second step. And now I want to use our construction, the maps that I've described yesterday. So we can construct, with this story of Boozman function and visual measure, not visual measures, but these Patterson-Sullivan measures, we can construct maps and move this cycle by the maps. These maps are homotopy to the identity, so the image of this cycle remains in the same homotopy class. And the volume, hence, will be bounded below by this result by Gromov. On the other hand, the construction that we have made showed a property of contraction of volume. And here we can compute explicitly the coefficient, which is it. Well, you see now that if this critical exponent is strictly less than n minus 2, so we get a coefficient which is strictly less than 1, so that if you iterate the map, you get a sequence of cycles with volume going to 0, which contradicts Gromov's theorem. So just the construction of the map and this property that the volume of cycle is bounded below give the inequality. And then we have to deal with the equality case, which I probably won't talk about tomorrow either. So the key point, this story about cycle is not difficult. It's not really important. The key point is to construct these maps. And these are the same kind of construction that I made yesterday. One has to be a little bit more careful. And it's not the same kind. It's a variation in this construction, which is, I think, interesting. So these maps, they contract up to some factor. And if the factor of contraction is strictly less than 1, by iteration, you get objects which are smaller and smaller. But on the other hand, it's result by Gromov that I mentioned, say you cannot get object. And so you get contradiction and an inequality. So that's the idea. Maybe I show the map and skip the rest. I still have, how much do I have time? I still have 10 minutes, so let's forget about, maybe it's sufficient to see the maps. I have nice pictures, I like this one, but maybe I won't show it to you. Let me show the map. And that would be sufficient, actually. The rest are just picking a theorem in Gromov, picking a theorem in someone else, and so on. So let me show the part on which we have really been doing something, although, who knows. So we'll be using, again, this Patterson-Sullivan measure. So as I said before, you can construct for this group C, which is not co-compact, a Patterson-Sullivan kind of measure, family of measure, supported by the limit set. And it is, again, equivariant. This is always by construction. And, well, it satisfies also the property that we do want, that is that the density is related to the Boozman function. Now the coefficient is not n minus 1, is not the entropy of the ambient space, it's just this critical exponent. It's always what happened, actually. You can always think to the critical exponent. And this is a C equivalent map. I wrote it upstairs and twice. Okay, it was very late yesterday night. So now let me consider, so the barycentric map that I've been explaining yesterday is now different. So let me consider this expression. So apart from the exponential, let me erase this. So yesterday we had integral of Boosman with respect to the measure, d mu x. And we had taken minimum, unique minimum of this quantity. Today I'm considering something like exponential of Boosman. So this is a by theta. And I modify the d mu x by some other exponential. This is for but the spirit is that I replace this Boosman by exponential of Boosman. Actually, I could have done that yesterday too. But somehow that would work, that works very well for the real hyperbolic space, but would not work for the other hyperbolic spaces. Okay, and you do the same thing. So now it is strictly convex. There is absolutely no restriction, because if you remember, these Boosman functions, they are strictly convex sometimes, and in bad situations, they are just linear or affine. But if you take the exponential, it's always strictly convex. So this quantity is strictly convex, whatever the measure is. So we have we don't have the problem that we had yesterday, and it goes to infinity. And the same story. There is a unique critical point that you can call a barycenter of mu x, and you get a map, f twiddle of x, which is given by this construction. Okay, so this is very well adapted to the situation, and we'll see in a minute why. The point is, when you may ask the question, why didn't we do it yesterday? Well, the point is that you see two Boosman functions for which we are making the difference, and somehow this one is supported on the target space, and this one on the source space. And so if we want to make the difference, the two spaces have to be the same. So this works, this construction works only in the case when we are working with a fixed space and different groups moving inside. So this is a construction which is much more efficient than yesterday's, but it works only in this situation, unfortunately. And the rest is the same than yesterday. It's defined by an implicit equation, and the theorem gives the estimates. So you can check the estimates, and again you have to make the computation, compute the gradient and the Hn, the second derivative. So you write the differential. So for x fixed, you take the minimum in y. You write the implicit equation which makes nabla of b appear, and then you take a second derivative, and you check the coefficients. So here the measure mu is something like e to the minus delta, where delta is a critical exponent, dx of theta, say b mu 0. So here you see delta plus 1, which is the one which appears here. So this is much more efficient because we can not only compute the Jacobian of maximal dimension, that is the Jacobian of the map, but you can compute the Jacobian restricted to p-dimensional submanifold. That's what I call Jac sub p. And you get inequalities for all these Jacobian for all possible p's. With equality, if and only if you get not an isometry, but a projection on a subspace. Okay. And of course, it goes down to this cylinder and gives rise to a map homotopic to the identity. Well, it's one example where it explains a little bit how this works is when one is in the preferred situation, that is, there is on the quotient a totally geodesic submanifold which separates. So this is the universal cover of the totally geodesic submanifold, which I call Z. And the group C preserves this totally geodesic submanifold. Now if you take a point here, with its name, X, and you compute this map, what you get in that situation is the orthogonal projection onto this space here. So these maps relies on projection on the cycle, which is the one that appears in the story. Okay. Okay, and then the rest of the proof is what I explained before by iterating it. So maybe it's not necessary to give the rest of the proof. What is important is to see that this construction is sufficiently flexible so that you can adapt to each situation. So here is a situation with a fixed space and all kind of groups. This C could be almost anything. You can make this very efficient construction here, which unfortunately would not work in yesterday's setup. So tomorrow I'll try to go a little bit further in the study of group actings on Hadamard manifold and construct another variation of this map here. And okay, I'll stop here. Thank you. Any questions? Tea? Coffee?